Hey guys, welcome to my channel. My name is Ivan. In photography world, I'm known as Dreamframer, and today we're gonna be talking about white balance or color balance, a very important stuff. I know what you want to do now. You just want to skip this intro and go directly to the tutorial, but don't do that because the most important part of this video is actually what I'm gonna tell you now. When we talk about white balance or color balance, you have to know that you have to work with a calibrated monitor. If you still didn't calibrate your monitor, go to my channel, search for the video how to calibrate your monitor and watch that first. If you did calibrate your monitor, you can continue watching. Now first, how do we know if white balance is correct or not? When you take a look at the image and all the colors and tones look natural to you, then most likely the white balance is correct. If white is white and black is black and green is green, then you're probably fine. However, if the whole image has a certain hue, let's say looks kind of bluish or yellowish, then most likely white balance is incorrect and you can correct it. Now, don't get me wrong, you don't have to apply correct white balance to every image. You can actually create a certain atmosphere if you shift white balance toward, let's say, blue or yellow. In the first case, the picture will look colder. In the second case, the picture will look warmer. But that's called image toning. If you just have white balance that's off and doesn't look intentionally shifted, that's not a good thing. So, the important thing that I mentioned in the beginning of this intro is that no matter what kind of technique you apply to correct white balance, you have to train your eyes to understand what's good and what's not good. It's always convenient to have some white surface close to you when you edit your images, let's say a piece of white paper or white wall, so you can from time to time take a look at it and take a break from your screen. Sometimes I even close the image, move away from the computer for a couple of minutes, and then come back, open the image again and check it out. I'm going to show you now a few ways to correct white balance, but remember this, whatever automatic technique you are using, always use your eyes for a final judgment and adjust white balance in the end manually if you need to. Let's move to an example now. Now let's see how do we correct white balance on a picture. I chose this photo not because it's a good photo, but because it has incorrect white balance. You can notice that in shadow areas, for example this concrete here and the wood, the shadows are not really gray, they're kind of bluish, right? So we have to correct that. You have to train your eyes to recognize this right away. Even this table and chairs, they are painted in black, but if you take a close look, you can notice that the black is not really black. It's kind of dark gray, bluish. Another bad thing about this picture, but good for this tutorial, is that the contrast is not the best. We have this blown out white area in the top left corner between these leaves, and the black tones are not really black. So we're gonna correct contrast and white balance at the same time. I'm gonna drag the background layer to a new layer icon to create a background copy layer. And now with this background copy layer, I'm gonna click to adjustment layer icon and add a new layer. This is gonna be curves layer. Now I want you to take a look at the properties window for curves layer. If you don't see this properties window, then you just go to the top menu, click window and click properties. Let me increase the size of this window so you can see what I'm doing. So now we have this histogram over here, and on the left side of the histogram we have this point. This is called black point. On the right side there is a white point. Everything in between these 2 points are midtones. This histogram tells you how rich the image is in dark, mid and light tones. As you can see, our image is very rich in midtones, and then as you are getting closer to the white point, the graph goes down. At the very end of the graph we have this little spike, which means there is a small area on the picture that is completely white. And you guessed it, that's our blown out white area in the left upper corner of the picture. On the other side, as the graph approaches the black point, you can see that it falls down and then doesn't reach the left edge, and you have this small gap between the edge and the graph. This means that we don't really have any real black in our image. On the left side of this window, we have 3 eyedroppers. The top one is black, the mid one is gray, and the bottom one is white. We're going to use these 3 eyedroppers to tell our curves layer what is black, what is gray, and what is white on the picture. So I chose first black eyedropper, and I'm just gonna zoom and click on the darkest part of the image. Let's say here. This should be black. Okay. Now you can right away see that the curves layer adjusted these 3 lines over here, and those lines represent different color channels. The blue one, the green one, and the red one. The red one is under the white line, so you can't really see it, or almost can't see it. Let me zoom a little bit and switch off this top curves layer so you can see the difference. This was before, and this is after. You can notice how our image became darker, right? At least in those shadow areas. Now I'm gonna click on the white eyedropper and choose one of these white areas over here. I just want to point something out. When you have something blown out white like here on this picture, you probably don't want to click on that because that's white anyway. You should probably try to find a tone that is very similar, almost white, and then click on that. Let's say maybe here. You don't want to click on something that is much darker than the white tone because you're gonna make a lot more of these blown out areas. Now I'm gonna use our gray eyedropper and try to find something on the image that should be gray in real life. Probably this concrete pole over here. Maybe these shadows, but the wood can be also kind of brownish or reddish. So the concrete is probably the safest choice. So I'm just gonna click on it. And you see that our picture became much warmer. Let's see what happens if I click here on this wood. The picture obviously becomes blue again, and that's because these wooden planks are not really gray, they are actually brown. You can now try and click on different areas, but as I mentioned, for this picture, the concrete is probably the safest choice. I just want to mention that if you're not happy with the way the image looks now, if you think it's too warm, you can always go and change the opacity of this top curves layer in order to decrease the effect. Let me switch it off to see how it was before. This was before, and this is after. If you take a look at our histogram now, you can see that curves layer divided red, green and blue channel, and they're not aligned with this white line anymore. That means that our curves layer automatically adjusted the lightness and contrast of red, green and blue channels in order to correct white balance. I'm gonna delete curves layer now by dragging it down to a trash can so I can show you a couple of ways to correct white balance in Camera Raw. If you have older versions of Photoshop and you want to open JPEG, TIFF or other image formats that are not supported by default by Camera Raw, then you have to click on File, Open As, go to the right bottom corner and choose Camera Raw. Since I use Photoshop CC, I can just go back and click on Filter in the top menu and choose Camera Raw. Now when the picture is imported in Camera Raw, you can notice that the temperature of the picture on the top is 0. The simplest thing I can do is just click here on white balance and click Auto. And you pay attention to the temperature. Camera Raw obviously automatically adjusted white balance by increasing the temperature and also shifting the tint towards purple. If you're not happy with the way Camera Raw corrected white balance, you can always use these two sliders, temperature and tint, to change it, and for that you need to train your eyes and to know what exactly you want. Let's say we're happy now how Camera Raw did the job, but of course, as before, we are not really happy with the contrast. I can try to increase the contrast by using contrast slider on the right, but then this blown out area and this one too, and also this one will become larger, and we don't want that. When you have a case like this, an image with blown out whites, the only way to increase the contrast is to deepen the shadows. That's why I'm moving this blacks slider to the left and shadows to the left. So this way, we did increase the contrast, we deepened the shadows, we didn't touch the light tones at all, and we also have corrected white balance. Let me now reset these sliders and just tell you that instead of using this auto white balance option, you can also do everything manually. If you know what you're doing, then try to correct white balance manually with these two sliders, temperature and tint. In this case, we're gonna move the temperature slider to the right toward yellow to the point where we think it looks good. And then we can play a little with the tint slider, move it left or right. And then again, we can correct the contrast by deepening the shadows and blacks as well. So this was manual way to correct white balance and contrast in Camera Raw. I'm gonna reset all the sliders again to show you another less obvious way to correct white balance in Camera Raw. Here in the top left corner there is a tool called White Balance Tool. I'm gonna take it and click on any object on the picture that should be gray in real life, for example this concrete. As soon as I clicked, Camera Raw adjusted white balance according to the point where I clicked. If I'm not happy, I can try and click different points in the picture and find the one that I think is the best. Again, you have to trust your eyes, so you have to train your eyes to know what looks good. And even if you can't find the right point, you can always go and adjust white balance manually by shifting these two sliders, tint and temperature. After that, of course, you can adjust the contrast by moving the sliders for shadows, for blacks, for highlights and whites, depending on the picture you have. These were some simple methods to correct white balance in Camera Raw and Photoshop. Now let's go back to Photoshop because I want to show you an advanced method of correcting white balance. Be sure to follow what I'm doing, and if you need, repeat this section of the video a couple of times so you can learn better. I'm gonna use few layers to do this, and it might look a little bit confusing in the beginning. Let me show you first the variation of this method that you can find in other videos on YouTube, and then I'm gonna show you my variation on this method that I couldn't find anywhere else. Just to be clear, I'm not saying that I'm the only one who came up with this. I'm just saying that I couldn't find any other video that teaches the same method. And I think it's a great way to correct white balance. Okay, let me add a new layer, an empty layer. I'm gonna go to Edit, click Fill, and choose 50% gray. To show you that this layer is exactly gray, I'm gonna click here on Color Picker, and if I click anywhere on the picture, you can see that the values for red, green and blue channel are the same. They're all 128, which is exactly 50% gray. Whenever you see the same values for red, green and blue channels, you have to know that you clicked exactly on a gray color. Now, the numbers can be different, for example 50, 50, 50 or 200, 200, 200. That just means that you clicked on lighter or darker shade of gray. The higher the number, the lighter the gray. The lower the number, the darker the gray color. Let me close this window now so we can go back to our layers. Now we have to add an adjustment layer, and that's gonna be threshold layer. And we're gonna add another adjustment layer, and that's gonna be curves layer. Now let's go back to our gray layer and turn it off. Our image now has only two tones, black and white, and I'm gonna click on threshold layer to try to find the darkest point on the picture and the lightest point on the picture. Over here in properties window for threshold we have one slider. I'm gonna move it completely to the left. And then when picture becomes completely white, I'm gonna move it a little bit to the right just to get these first dark spots over here. Then I'm gonna zoom so I can see what I'm doing here. Okay, and then I'm gonna go to eyedropper tool, hold it and choose color sampler tool. With this tool selected, I'm gonna click and hold Shift on my keyboard and click at one of the black areas on the picture. This way, Color Sampler tool left a mark with number 1 on it. This is gonna be our black point, the darkest point on the picture. Now I'm gonna find the lightest point on the picture using threshold layer by moving this slider to the right. The picture should become totally black, but we have some white points over here, and that's because there is a blown out area over there. So I'm gonna move the slider a little bit to the left and then zoom more so I can see what I'm doing. Just to remind you, we are still using Color Sampler tool, and I'm gonna click and hold my Shift on the keyboard and click, let's say here, to leave the second mark. This second mark will be our white point, the lightest point on the picture. Now we have the darkest point and the lightest point. So you are guessing, now we need the gray point, the neutral point. For this, I have to turn on visibility on gray layer and change its blending mode to difference. Now, when I click on threshold layer, the graph looks different, the histogram looks different. I'm gonna pull back to the left this slider again, pull it just a little bit to the right, and then choose one of these black areas again to leave the third mark, which will be our gray point. I'm gonna click and hold Shift again and leave the third mark. Now we have 3 points on the picture. We have gray point, we have white point, and black point. I'm gonna turn off the visibility for threshold and gray layer. We still have our third point over here. So now I'm going to curves layer, and I'm gonna use again one of these 3 eyedroppers. You're guessing it's gonna be gray eyedropper. I'm just gonna go back to our picture and click on the third point that we marked. And you can notice that the picture is already changed. Now we have to mark the black point and the white point. I'm gonna zoom to find our first marker, use black eyedropper, and click on the marker. The image changed again a little bit. Now I'm gonna use white eyedropper to click on this second mark that we left, the white point mark. This will not really change the picture because this is blown out white and it's not gonna change anything. But anyway, the picture already looks much better. The contrast is corrected, white balance is corrected as well. If you're not happy with the way it looks like now, you can always change the opacity for curves layer and that way decrease the effect. Now let me show you my variation on this method. I'm already calling it mine like I invented it, right? But I'm sure somebody else already came up with this before I did. I'm deleting all sampler tool points holding Alt or Option on my keyboard and clicking on them, and I'm also gonna delete the top 3 layers including the gray layer. Now I need to add something similar to 50% gray, but it's not gonna be exactly that. And why is that? Well, we already established that this image has an incorrect white balance, which means that objects that are gray in real life are actually not gray in this picture. So we can't really expect that by matching 50% gray layer with objects in this picture, we find a perfect match. It's better to find what is actually gray for this particular picture. Let me first copy this layer 1, and then I'm gonna go to the top menu, click on Filter, go to Blur, and choose Average. Photoshop now calculated the average tone and color for this layer and changed the whole layer into this specific tone and color. I'm gonna go to a color picker and show you that this is not really gray. If I click anywhere on the picture, you can see that the values for red, green, and blue are not equal, which means we are not clicking on a gray color. There is more green than the rest. This little circle, in case of the gray, would be all the way to the edge. Now you can see that the numbers are equal. But if I move to the right, then we are going into the green color, and so on. Anyway, we have to repeat the process from before. I'm gonna add threshold layer and I'm gonna add curves layer. And then I'm gonna go back and turn off the visibility for our almost gray layer. Clicking on threshold layer, moving the slider to the left, moving it back to the right a little bit. When we get our first black areas, I'm gonna go zoom there to see what I'm doing. And then with color sampler tool active, as before, I'm gonna click and hold shift and leave the first mark. This is gonna be our black point. Now let's move the slider to the right, moving it back to the left just a little bit to uncover more of these white areas, and clicking over there to leave the second mark. Now let's turn on the visibility for our average layer, change its blending mode to difference, and then I'm gonna click on threshold layer and move the slider to the left and a little bit to the right, and leave the third mark at one of those black areas. Let me move this a little bit, zoom in, clicking, holding shift, and this is gonna be our gray point. Now I'm gonna turn off the visibility for the average and threshold layer, and I'm gonna click curves layer to activate it, and I'm gonna use gray eyedropper and click on this point, the third point or gray point on our image. Now I can zoom out, click on black eyedropper, zoom into our first mark or black point, and just click on this black point with the black eyedropper. I'm just gonna move the picture to the left, click on white eyedropper, and click on our white point. As you can see, Photoshop already corrected white balance and contrast. Let's turn off this curves layer to see the change. This was before, this is after. And of course, if you're not happy, you can always change the opacity for curves layer. Aside from that, of course, you can add a new adjustment layer like color balance layer or hue saturation layer, and use these two to play with white balance more. Now I want to show you one special case. Sometimes you're gonna have to take a picture outside in the winter when the ground is covered with snow and the sky is blue. On a day like that, the camera can get confused with all the whiteness from the snow, and the shadows can look really blue, like intense blue. So let me show you how to fix that. I'm gonna open one picture like that. These two dogs. The picture is in native Nikon format, so it's opening in Camera Raw by default. You can see this shadow, and you can see that it looks really dark and blue, right? So of course we can go and correct white balance first if it's off. It's not really off on this picture, but okay, let's just go and make this picture look a little bit warmer and see if that's gonna change the shadow. So I can go and try to increase the temperature of this image by moving the temperature slider to the right, or I can just use the auto white balance option. Any of these two really. I'm gonna try with auto. You can see that the picture became much warmer, maybe even too warm, so let's move this temperature slider a little bit to the left. But what we can notice is that the shadow is still too dark and too blue. So I can try to add some light to the shadows and maybe decrease some of the whites, but then we are losing the contrast on the dog's fur, and the shadow is still too blue. If I increase the vibrance to kind of recover some colors on the fur of these dogs, I can do that, but then the shadow becomes even more blue. So we are basically just moving from one problem to another one and another one, and then going back to the first problem like an infinite loop. But there is a way to fix this. So when you are happy with the way the rest of the image looks like, aside from the shadow, Then you can just go here and click on Hue, Saturation, Lightness and Grayscale tab. And while you are in the Saturation tab, go down to the blue slider and move it to the left to desaturate this blue. You see how natural the shadow looks now. If I move it back to the 0, you can see how blue it was before. And I'm just gonna leave it here because I think it looks good. And I'm gonna click Open Image. This was an easy way to correct white balance, contrast, and some color on a tricky picture like this. You can always use this when you are trying to correct white balance and there is one color that is too strong. You can always go to that Hue, Saturation, Lightness tab and decrease the saturation of that color only. If you like this video, press that like button, leave a comment, ask me a question. I'm gonna do my best to answer all your questions, guys. Also, subscribe if you still didn't, especially if you plan on selling your photos online. See you in the next video. Bye.